Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are joined by Heather White, who is an accomplished author and founder and CEO of One Green Thing, to discuss her work in eco-anxiety and empowering actions to save the planet, including with her new book available for pre-order, 60 Days to a Greener Life, Ease and Eco-Anxiety Through Joyful Daily Action. Heather is a nationally recognized environmental policy expert with more than 2 decades of experience in climate policy and environmental advocacy, including serving as a presidential campaign staffer to Al Gore, the environmental counsel to U.S. Senator Russ Feingold, and enhancing performance, strategic planning, and fundraising efforts as president and CEO of Yellowstone Forever and the executive director of the Environmental Working Group. She's a frequent spokesperson on climate and environmental issues and has been featured on Good Morning America, CBS, and NBC, and quoted in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Teen Vogue. Thank you so much for joining us today, Heather. It's truly an honor.
Heidi, it is an honor to be here with you. So many of us veteran climate activists talk about Generation Z and how inspired we are by you. And I know that might get old because you don't necessarily need people to tell you that they're inspired. You need people to act. But thank you so much for your leadership.
I really appreciate that. And I mean, just also, I know we kind of talked about this already, but I'm super inspired by the work that you do and really excited for this conversation.
Thank you.
Um, Yeah, and I mean, I guess just to get started, I guess like in your work, you highlight importantly that a key barrier to entry into environmental work is that the whole process of where it gets started is incredibly nebulous for many. And I mean, even in my personal experience, I started this podcast because I had no idea what climate work looks like as a high school student looking in. So I guess, how did you come to do the work that you do today? And I mean, tell us a bit more about the work you do today. And I guess like also, where did you personally figure out where to get started?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, the issue of climate change is so overwhelming. And I think the more that you know, the more that you see the science, the more that you understand what is possible if we don't do what we need to do, the easier it is to become paralyzed. And the way that I got involved in what I do is really through a conversation with my teenage kids. My kids are ages 18 and 16 now, but it was several years ago when my older daughter was a freshman in high school, and she asked permission to walk out of school for a Greta Thunberg inspired climate strike at Bozeman High School here in Bozeman, Montana. And I, of course, Heidi was like, I'm an environmentalist. Of course you should go. But without even thinking, kind of my mom energy kicked in, and I offered to, because it was supposed to rain and she had a heavy backpack. I was like, you know what? I'll just pick you up and I'll drive you to the rally.
Oh, wow.
That didn't go over well, Heidi. Oh wow was a very nice perspective and reaction, but hers was a little
But
more like, wait, what? You're going to drive me to a rally? It's a walkout. It's a gas car. Mom, where are the baby boomers? Where's Gen X? Where are the millennials? You cannot leave this climate crisis all on our shoulders.
Mm.
I'm so sick and tired of all this praise for young people. We need your help. And that was a moment when I realized, you just read my resume. This has been my life's work. My husband does grizzly bear conservation. So like we we do this all the time. And if our kids felt alone in climate action, my big question was what was going on around other dinner tables. So
Mhm, mhm,
in that moment, in that dinner table conversation, I realized two things. One, I needed to research the mental health impacts of the climate crisis, which is called eco-anxiety. And then I also needed to create a way for more people to see themselves as part of the solution, to welcome them into the climate movement.
Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate the work that you do on that aspect. And I mean, I really want to go into like the tools and resources that you've created since then. Your book 60 Days. I mean, just to get started on that, like it isn't just focused on daily action, interestingly enough, but joyful daily action. And I guess like that keyword joy. Can you talk more about how your second book came to be and the importance of joy in taking action?
Oh, absolutely, Heidi. So my first book is called One Green Thing: Discover Your Hidden Power to Help Save the Planet. And I was writing that book as I was starting my nonprofit, onegreenthing.org. And the basis of that book is this idea of a daily practice. You do one thing each day to help save the planet. And of course, obviously, we need global market solutions. We need systemic change. But what happens is when most people hear that, Heidi, when they hear like we need global market solutions, global policy solutions, we need scale solutions, they think, well, where do I fit in? I don't really
Yeah.
matter. And so that was the purpose of that book. And it was a deep dive into environmental law, environmental policy. And also I had this assessment of who are you in service? It's kind of like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs. So when people say, just write down your strengths and you can figure out how to get involved in climate action, this is a guide for you to really figure out who you are and how you show up for other people. This next book is super short, easy to read, easy to understand. It's like a daily devotional. And this is not the actual copy of the book, but you can see it's very positive looking. You can see the windmills and, this idea that action can be joyful in climate. And I think all of us understand the potential for an apocalyptic future. Excuse me. I think all of us understand the potential for an apocalyptic future. But just this idea of we can solve this crisis. We have all of the solutions. What's missing is the political will. And even more than that, we could build something really beautiful if we all get involved. And this idea of taking joyful action each day is exercising agency over this huge issue and helping you ease your eco-anxiety.
Mhm.
And I think, Heidi, the thing that was really important to me in the research is something that I think a lot of us have missed in the environmental community, especially policy wonks like me that are always focused on legislation and focusing on scaling solutions, is that we forget individual action
Mm.
drives culture change. And we have to have that culture change for these big policies to work.
Yeah, no, definitely that, and I really appreciate just building that sense of like actionable optimism is it's really, sometimes missing and forgotten when we talk about climate communication, but so important in making, that action sustainable on an individual level. And I guess like, I mean, this goes into my next question about your mission going from personal action to cultural shifts to policy change. I guess like what are some of those primary cultural changes in your mind that we need to make progress in towards motivating also policy change?
Oh, such a great question. I think the first thing is that when people realize the extent of this problem and they realize the truth that the people who've contributed the least amount of carbon pollution are suffering the most. And that's true racially, that's true economically, that's true globally when you think about the global north versus the global south or the G7 countries.
Mhm.
It's also true intergenerationally. And I write about how the majority of carbon pollution in today's atmosphere was created after 1990, and I graduated high school in 1991. So Heidi, your generation and the next generation, Gen Alpha, are going to experience way more extreme weather events from the carbon pollution that was created in my lifetime more than I ever will. So I think when people realize this, there is a lot of shame. And there's a lot of worry, but there is a lot of
Mhm.
shame. And I think one of the things we need to do is, yes, shame can be a big motivator, but for a lot of people, it gets them in the freeze response. So I think we need to make sure that we're very clear as environmentalists is that everyone is welcome. Everyone is needed in this movement. There's no gatekeeping. We need everybody, and everyone shows up in a different way. So I think that's the first thing we need to do. And we need to let them know that their individual actions are important, but it's not about their math. Because we get caught up as a wonk. I'm always like calculating and like, it's not about your individual carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, right?
Mhm.
We know that the carbon footprint idea actually came from
Yeah.
BP, like Ogilvy Communications kind of created that. And if you can't say specific brands, I'll just say it's a PR company, PR company from oil and gas executives to try to switch the burden onto us when
Mhm.
it's the fossil fuel industry that's created this. But I think trying to get over the shame but the way you get over the shame is by feeling all the feels. You have to feel all
Mhm.
the feels and then providing an entry point for everyone to feel like they're part of the movement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that. We're also while acknowledging that I guess like this is something that I've also personally struggled with in terms of like getting local community members to, get into climate action. There's a lot of focus on reduce, reuse, recycle at first when people learn about the environment, but then you've come to learn that, for example, in reality, nothing really gets recycled in this, at least in the US, the system that we have. So, I mean, and you also contextualize this as you mentioned in your first book. But considering that we do exist in this broken system, not limited, but or including but not limited to that incredible influence of big corporations, should we still be sorting our recycling, for example, if nothing gets recycled and, take those individual actions?
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. The fact is, when it comes to cardboard, 90% of our cardboard is successfully recycled in the United States. Plastics is the big challenge, right? 9% is actually recycled, and the rest of it is often shipped, to other countries for them to deal with our plastic waste, and that requires a lot of accountability for plastics manufacturers, which of course, what are they? Oil and gas companies, right? This is a fossil fuel product. So we need to do that. But the individual action does matter. And this is what happens though, Heidi. I think you're speaking to a larger phenomenon, is that the more you learn, the more complex and interconnected you see how everything is. Like, I bought this sustainable brand, but then I found out it's made in China. And then I realized that, the workers may not be treated the way they need to be treated in this particular factory where this product is made. So even if it's sustainable, what is the impact? Or I decided to make sure I get an EV vehicle, but then I'm reading all this stuff about rare earth minerals. Should I get the EV? The answer is yes, you should get the EV if you can afford it. And there's also great tax credits with the Inflation Reduction Act, but not everybody can. But what happens is people again get frozen when they start thinking about the interconnectedness. And what I'm trying to say is that the intentionality matters.
Mm.
The intentionality matters because we have to demand sustainable solutions. And we also have to understand, just like in medicine, right? We change our behavior based on the science. The
Mhm.
more we know, the more that we change, but we still act. We still all know we need to eat more fruits and vegetables and we need to exercise, right? No matter what what the latest study is about omega-3s or about vitamin C, we know that that is fundamentally not going to change.
Mhm.
Reduce, reuse, recycle, moving towards a circular economy. Those are basics, even if the details, require a lot more advocacy and a
Mhm.
lot more oversight. And we need to protect ourselves from greenwashing too. So yes is the answer. Yes, and I would say yes, and
Mhm.
demand accountability. Yes, and when you find the intricate details and the challenges with the new behavior, educate yourself, share more people about it, and continue to move forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean also like there's actions like for example composting that like the whole process we can also take personal control over that. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Yes. I compost and, I live in Montana where it's basically 9 months of winter, so it becomes a real challenge in the winter. But I have like a kitchen table composter that I use too, one of those electric composters, which doesn't actually create compost, but it just breaks down and
Yeah,
dehydrates the
yeah.
food, which really helps me in the winter. But there's all kinds of opportunities. Even in Bozeman, I just got a flyer that our community council or city council is thinking about community composting, which is fantastic. And that wouldn't happen if people hadn't said, we really need this service. We need this
Mm.
opportunity to make sure that our food waste, which, as you know, is 8% of global carbon emissions, are caused by food waste globally.
Mhm.
So that's an important opportunity for us to create change.
Mm, definitely. Um, yeah, and I mean, I guess like going off of what you mentioned earlier, which I've personally taken the test. Like you said, it's kind of a personality test, but for service. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about how this tool came to be, and I guess also how those who do take the test can best utilize and move on from their results?
Oh, thank you for that question, Heidi. Yeah, I realized that, in the environmental community, we often start the conversation with the what, like, how do you do this, not that? You
Mm.
want to recycle here, but understand that it doesn't work there. And you need to choose this brand, not that brand. If you're going to, use public transit, you need to make sure you're doing this type of public transit rather than asking the fundamental question, which is who?
Mhm.
Who are you? How do you want to show up in the world? What do you want your legacy to be? What are your strengths? How do you want to contribute? And so the behavioral research shows that people are more likely to change their behavior if it connects with their identity.
Mm.
So if you decide you want to go on a fitness plan, you're more likely to swim 3 times a week if you say, I'm a swimmer. I'm Heidi
Mm.
and I'm a swimmer.
Oh
Or if you
yeah.
say, hi, I'm Heather and
Mhm.
I'm a runner, you're more likely to actually keep up that habit. So I realized that in the environmental community, we've kind of been doing a disservice. We need to show people how they can show up other than create a list of your strengths. What are you good
Mhm.
at? So this personality assessment is very much inspired by Myers-Briggs or Enneagram. It's a 5-minute online tool. It's available at onegreenthing.org. And there's 7 different archetypes. And based on your archetype, like for example, if you're the adventurer, which embraces the physicality of the outdoors, you love taking people outside of your comfort zone, I then match you to a daily practice of sustainability. Just one thing you do every day. It makes a difference, right? That can calm your ego anxiety, can shift the culture. It can be everything from going out on a hike with a friend. It can be volunteering at a local land trust. It can be calling your member of Congress for a policy that you think is important. But this idea of a practice like running or yoga or journaling or prayer is really important in managing mental health aspects of climate, but
Mhm.
also in creating that important culture change.
Yeah. No, really, really appreciate that, and super glad that this resource exists from, the perspective of a test taker. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Also, on this topic of eco-anxiety, you've written a lot about the eco-anxiety trifecta, is what you call it, that,
Yes.
Gen Z is experiencing today. I guess, like, for context and for definition, can you walk us through
Sure.
those, like, trifectas, and also, maybe what advice do you have for youth who may be listening that are experiencing one, two, or likely all three aspects of that?
Oh, yes, absolutely, Heidi. Thank you for that. So the first is just the definition of eco anxiety. And eco anxiety, this whole concept has been around for a while. In 1997, the American Psychological Association defined it as the chronic fear of environmental doom. And in September 2021, the Oxford English Dictionary actually included eco anxiety and called it unease or apprehension about the future due to human activity causing climate change, global warming. And we're also seeing different terms like solastalgia,
Mhm.
climate grief, eco grief, climate doom, eco despair, climate anxiety. All of these terms are really talking about the mental health impacts of climate. And in my book, I say that I think eco anxiety is even broader than climate. It's just a concern about the future that
Mhm.
young people are inheriting from us. So that's eco anxiety. There was also a recent survey, global study of I say kids, but young adults ages 16 through 25. And 47% said that climate anxiety interfered with their daily life. And 1 out of 4 do not want to have children of their own
Mhm.
because they're so worried about the climate crisis. And I think for Gen Xers like me, and I think for baby boomers and millennials, the fact that 1 out of 4 Gen Zers don't want to have kids because of climate, not because of lifestyle choice, but because of climate change is really a wake up call for us all to get
Mhm.
involved. But your question was about the eco anxiety trifecta. Okay, what causes eco anxiety? And I call it the trifecta. There are 3 things. The first is generalized anxiety. Generation Z and Gen Alpha, the generation that's younger than you, have such high rates of anxiety that the Surgeon General has said that it is a mental health crisis that we
Mhm.
haven't seen before in the United States. So generalized anxiety. Then there's loneliness, and Cigna does a loneliness survey every year. And what's interesting is the stats were the same pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. 5 out of 10 baby boomers say that they experience chronic loneliness compared to 8 out of 10 Gen Zers. So we have a situation where young people are lonelier than the elderly. And then the third factor, Heidi, you know all too well, and it is a hyper awareness of the climate crisis because of social media. When older people like me talk about social media, we get worried about cyberbullying, which of course is a concern. We get worried about attention, not spending enough time in nature, being captured by different brands. But for a lot of young people, what they are seeing is real life impacts of climate around the world from other people their age, whether it be JFK flooding, the airport flooding, whether it
Mhm.
be floods across the global north, whether it be wildfires in Canada, whether it be extreme droughts in Kenya and Tanzania. They are seeing, almost like citizen journalists, young people their age showing the impact of climate right now. And those 3 factors contribute to eco anxiety.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like really important to kind of take account of the circumstances that we're currently in. And yeah, no, I definitely feel all three, so I think it's a very accurate trifecta. And yeah, just like I guess like just also it's important to, I mean, talk about like how to navigate that for young people. What advice do you personally share for young people in your life?
Yes. So how to navigate it? The first thing you need to do is feel all the feels. Just let yourself have the opportunity, whether it's journaling, whether it's going for a long walk and thinking about it, however it is that you process emotions, you need to create space to process emotions.
Mm.
I think the other thing, and this is interesting, is that when I wrote my books, my target audience was for older people like me, um, to open up space to ask the young people in their lives how they feel about the future. And what's interesting is that I'm finding Gen Zers are purchasing my books and giving them to the older people that they care about in their life. So it's been really, really interesting. It's like, look, here's how you can help. But
Mm.
how to manage it, the first you want to feel all the feels. Other things that you can do is figure out how you want to contribute. This idea of agency and something that's so overwhelming is to not get too caught up of like, I bought this compostable packaging, I convinced this restaurant I work for to go compostable. And then I realized that this product doesn't actually really break down until like 5 to 10 years. So it's not what I thought it was. And I'm really upset. No, your intention matters there because you're moving the market. You're trying to
Mm.
find the better solutions and you constantly adjust. So think about how you want to contribute in your everyday life and just do one thing. Take one action every day in order to make yourself be more centered and focused about how you feel about the future, and then also create that culture shift. The other thing I talk about in 60 Days to a Greener Life is this idea of being an awesome ancestor and the importance of engaging the older people you love and talking to them about how you feel. What I hear from my friends, and I'm in my 50s, my friends will be like, well, of course your kids have eco anxiety, Heather. They're your kids. You do environmental policy. And to a person, when I say to them, ask a young person in your life how they feel about the future, it's been a game changing conversation.
Mm.
So, as a Gen Zer, I want to encourage you to talk to the older people in your life that you love and care about how you're feeling, and ask them to support you and to get involved. And not necessarily in the way that my kids eye roll of all the praise, like, Heidi, you're so amazing. I can't believe you have a podcast in high school, which of course is amazing and true. But you need support. Your colleagues need support. I do like how I called your high school friends colleagues. That's so funny. But like, you all need support. You can't do it alone. And this intergenerational partnership, I call it think beyond your age. And I also tap into this idea of being an awesome ancestor, which is kind of a weird thing when you're 17, 18, 19, 20, think about being an ancestor. But for people like me, it's not that far off about who you want to be, what you want your legacy to be. And I have discussion guides in the book to have those conversations with older people that you care about and to talk about legacy, but also ways for you to download on the website, 7 to 21 day action plans, kind of like a fitness plan to do one thing every day, what I call one green thing every day, to manage your eco anxiety and to also move forward with that culture shift we need.
Mm. Yeah, that advice really resonates. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I mean, also just like personally, in terms of like general mental health and burnout and whatnot, this is kind of related to that. You do a lot from leading One Green Thing to consulting to writing to serving on the board of numerous nonprofits. I guess like what does a typical day in your life look like and how do you avoid or manage burnout and take care of your own mental health?
Oh, such an insightful question, Heidi. It is so much easier to say all the things than do them. One of the things that I have a huge challenge with is sleep.
Mm.
It is challenging for me to get the 6 to 8 hours. You're supposed to have 8 hours, I know, but I try for 6 to 8 hours a night. And I actually did a workshop last week, Eco Anxiety Summit, and one of my friends who is a professor of yoga at USC, can you believe that? She's actually the director of yoga and getting her PhD in sleep studies, was talking about the importance of sleep and climate action. And she pointed to the Bhopal disaster in India, Chernobyl,
Mm.
in the former Soviet Union, and also Exxon Valdez, where a lack of sleep of workers who were trying to make key decisions was one of the huge factors that
Mm.
contributed to those environmental disasters. And so she was just pointing out that a lot of times when we're not taking care of ourselves, we think it's just hurting us. It's not hurting anybody else, but the potential for it to hurt a lot of people is actually really great. And
Mm.
so this idea of protecting yourself from burnout and resting is really important, not only for your personal mental health, but also for those around you and even people you don't know. So I thought that was a very powerful story.
Yeah, yeah.
So a typical day for me, I fortunately work from home, but I'm on mountain time. So my days start at really all kinds of odd times depending what interviews I'm doing. I try to in the mornings, make sure I spend some time connecting to nature. When it's -40 in Montana, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time outside, but I do try to make time for nature every day. And I think that's an important way to deal with eco anxiety too, is spending time in nature. What we're trying to protect also helps heal us. There's a great quote from the writer Anne Lamott that I love, and she says, "Go outside, look up, the secret to life." And I just love that. Like that simple looking up, that simple perspective can really help you manage your burnout. Journaling
Mm,
is a powerful tool. I'm a wonk, and I'm happy to talk about the 7 different archetypes, but the wonk is the person who's really focused on climate solutions and focused on translating complex data and science into ways that people can understand. And so I love calling my member of Congress. 202-224-3121 is the Capitol switchboard. And my particular member of Congress doesn't, in the House of Representatives, doesn't, align with any of my values, but I love
mm,
leaving messages because it's his staff's job to take my phone calls,
mhm,
and that makes me feel better. So,
mm.
so those are the type of things that I do to avoid burnout, is just really, I'm personally working on rest and making sure I'm resting, spending time in nature, journaling, and then in my own way, in the way that works for me, taking action because it's fun.
Yeah.
And what's fun for me may be different from other people.
No, definitely. Yeah, no, but that's super insightful. And yeah, no, I am personally guilty as charged also with terms of sleep deprivation.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I didn't even think about that. Like with the
Right?
excellent, that's really, really, yeah, really powerful.
It's
Hmm.
very powerful. And just understanding that you self-care and self-compassion, which I also write about in this book, this idea of connection and self-compassion, how important that is in the movement, because it's not all on your shoulders, Heidi.
Hmm.
It's not all on my shoulders, but together collectively we can make a significant change. And there's science to back that up, right? I'm talking about individual behavior change, managing your emotions, feeling all the feels, and then shifting to culture change. But the math does add up if we all do it. Project
Hmm.
Drawdown said that projectdrawdown.org, terrific resource, said that if we all changed our habits, right? Individual and household actions could contribute up to 25% of the global carbon emission reductions we need. So the math does add up if everybody does it.
I really wanted to shift into a conversation about just like being an environmental leader and what. Can you talk about some of the major challenges or barriers or I guess like notable learning curves that you've had to navigate in your career?
Yes, and there have been many. So the first thing I want to say to everyone listening, especially the Gen Zers who are listening, is that sustainability and the sustainability economy are about to explode.
Mm,
Every job you have, every career opportunity will connect to sustainability and climate action somehow. Jamie Alexander, also another great environmental leader, says every job is a climate job, and that is true. So everything you do, whether it's interior design to acting to being a professional football player, will be impacted by climate, and you will have to know something about sustainability. So that's first and foremost. When I was going to law school in the 1990s, I vividly remember trying to get the Law Review, which is basically the publication, to do a symposium on Southern natural resources, which is,
mm,
I'm from Tennessee, and like the Great Smoky Mountains is like the most visited national park in the United States, and challenges with air pollution, coal. There's nuclear plants near there, challenges with water, the
mhm,
snail darter, which was the keystone species that made the Endangered Species Act what it is. Like that species was able to stop a
mm,
dam from being built, and really tested that act. So there was so much legacy and history there. Folks weren't ready for it. They were
mm.
like, oh, that was really cool in the 70s, when we passed the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act and when EPA was created. But, we're all good now. And Heidi, as you know, we were not good in the 1990s. Everything wasn't okay in the 1990s. So that was a personal challenge for me going into this field. I think because I was just like, I think clean air, clean water, land, I think these are all going to be important issues, clean energy, as the future moves forward. I think that barrier's been removed now. I think, all of the polling shows that the vast majority, 3/4 of Americans, know climate change is real and know that human activity causes it. That's the primary reason for it. Mhm. So I don't think you're going to have that barrier that I had. I think the other thing is having absolute faith in yourself, like understanding that I'm very, as a wonk, And that's again one of the archetypes. I'm very structured and organized. I love my outlines. I like my calendar. I like things to be a certain way. And knowing that it is important to have a plan about how you want to contribute and what you want to do, but you also just need to have faith that it's going to work out, and it will. That faith and that optimism will really help you move forward. I think other challenges is that, we've seen, and this is an important conversation, I think, to have intergenerationally. We know we have so far to go with racial equality, with gender equality,
Mhm.
when we're talking about gender identity and sexual orientation. Like, there's so many huge challenges in front of us, and all the inequities are kind of front and center, especially for Gen Z, when we're talking about international relations and all that's happening internationally, and Israel and Gaza. Like, it's
Mhm.
very, very top of mind, and not to mention climate, all the elections, attacks
Right.
on
Yeah.
democracy, you name it. But I think what is important to keep in mind is that we have done big things before. The arc that I've seen, the expansion of rights has been substantial, even with the overturning of the Supreme Court case just a couple of years ago on reproductive freedom. Like, I have seen such huge expansion of rights. So personally, being a woman in science, being a woman in the environmental movement has had a lot of challenges, but I'm seeing a lot more opportunities and kind of that going away in many
Mm.
respects. The work is it's unfinished work for sure. So I think that that's a barrier and a challenge I've had. I think the other thing is, in life, you have all these opportunities, like your job career isn't linear. I guess that's what I was trying to say about having faith. You have a lot of different opportunities. I went from being a policy wonk, a campaign staffer, being a policy wonk on Capitol Hill, to working in environmental health and toxic chemicals and sustainable agriculture and organics and the impact that chemicals have on our bodies, to working in public lands and then working for Yellowstone. And then after that, I decided to become a writer. So I just think that there's all kinds of opportunities for you, and to just keep that faith in yourself and know that it's not necessarily a linear path.
Mm.
And then I think in conclusion, what I would say with respect to that question is just understand that despite the incredible challenges ahead of us, we have made in my lifetime incredible changes that I didn't think were possible culturally and legally, and that arc will continue despite the incredible challenges we have ahead.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good frame of mind to have. Really appreciate you sharing that. And more specific to your experience as an environmental leader, I guess, like, what have you come to learn about what good leadership really means?
Oh, wow. Good leadership is all about people, right? I think as a lot of us in climate, we get so focused on the solutions and focused on impact and focused on what's going on at COP27, COP28, COP29. And sometimes we get lost
Mm.
because we get so focused in the content that we get lost that this is, protecting the planet is all about protecting people and being very people centered. That
Mhm.
probably sounds really obvious, but it is harder said than done. And I think making sure you have a really good team around you of people that you trust and that you can be your authentic self with is very important, and actually kind of rare. So I think that's important in the environmental movement. I think the other thing is that there is gatekeeping. There is
Mm.
absolutely
Yeah.
gatekeeping in the environmental movement, and there is a lot of judgment. And I
Mhm.
understand, because people are angry and upset and worried, but I feel like that gatekeeping really hurts us in the long
Mhm.
run, because everyone can show up in their way, and one person changing their one habit, like if they decide to go with public transportation, or if they decide to do meatless Mondays, or if they decide to compost, that one action can influence a lot of other people in their community. If they get their congregation to start having conversations, intergenerational conversations about climate action, that's really powerful. So I think that we need to let go of that and let everybody know that we need them in the movement.
Mhm.
And I think having very personal conversations with the people that you know and love that may not be in alignment with you is really important. Respectful conversations where you bring people in and help them
Yeah.
understand.
Mhm. That's so true. Yeah, and that aspect of gatekeeping is something that I've kind of personally experienced also, but really haven't heard kind of called out before as much as it should be. Yeah, that's so important to highlight.
And
Thank
and people feel it. People, like, I had a friend say, "You're the nicest environmentalist
you.
I've ever met." And my goal isn't to be a nice environmentalist, right? Because we need big change, and we have to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable for
Hmm.
sure. And the politicians that have enabled this, and the cover up, they knew in the 1950s that their product was causing climate change. They knew that. So it's not about being, kumbaya, everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
It's holding the bad actors accountable. It's pushing for systemic change, but also letting somebody know if they're afraid of doing it wrong. Like, a lot of people are afraid of doing sustainability wrong,
Yeah.
and letting them know that it starts with the first step, and you can learn. You learn and change as you go, and as the science changes, and as we learn more. But please come in, because we need you, because that's the only way it's going to work. And I think we forget that, right? Because I'm a lawyer by training, and like, I think about the policy and the law. But if we don't have the culture that's willing to accept the policy change and the law, it's not going to work.
Mhm.
And we saw that with COVID, with masks, the whole debate about masks. The science said use masks, and then people didn't want it. And then the culture wasn't there. And then there was concerns about, does it really help us and does it not? And it just was a huge distraction from the fact that, we were trying to do all we can to deal with the pandemic. And so we have to have that culture shift, willing to accept the behavior change.
Yeah, definitely. I started touching on this a little bit with regards to leadership, but like, in climate it's not only for mental health, like just to have personal relationships. I've sometimes experienced that kind of loneliness that comes with being a young person in an environment. But I mean, for just anyone that's, looking to build a team, be it as a leader or, just building a network, what advice do you have for that?
Heidi, that is such an important question, because when you know all the things that you know about the potential for climate migration, there's a great series called Extrapolations on Apple TV. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of like Black Mirror. It's a climate sci-fi. um, I think it's a 7 or 9 part series with like Ed Norton and Sienna
Mm.
Miller and Daveed Diggs and Meryl Streep. And it just has all these heavy hitter, Forrest Whitaker, all these heavy hitter actors. But it basically talks about what our life is going to be like in 2040, 2050, 2060, 2070. And for example, like in Bangalore, India, their curfews in 2040, where people can only go out at night because it's too hot in the day. Like, you just see and when you're a young person and you're following these issues, you know what's ahead if we don't act. And
Mhm.
it's a lot to carry. It's very heavy, and it's very lonely, because you may be in class and just like looking around and being like, does anybody know? Like, do you
Yeah,
know
yeah.
what's happening? And so I think, and this is the hardest thing, the most important thing you can do is reach out, talk to people.
Mm.
And you can start with a text. I promise it doesn't have to be a phone call, because I know my kids are like, oh gosh, a phone call. Is everything okay? Why are you calling me? Um, but reaching out. And if you can find community IRL, not just digitally, IRL is really important. It makes a difference as well. So reaching out and sharing how you feel is important. I think also spending time in nature. I know that may seem trite, but it's not. All of the peer-reviewed scientific literature says time in nature can reduce cortisol. It can make you feel better. It's a great opportunity. And I want you to know, Heidi, that that's happened to me multiple times. Just so you know. Just so you know. um, um, but um, but I think spending time in nature is not trite. Spending time in nature, all the peer-reviewed literature says that time in nature lowers your blood pressure, lowers the stress hormone cortisol, increases feelings of peace and tranquility, and is an important part. But the loneliness, it's proactively, you have to reach out, which is easier said than done. But by
Mhm.
reaching out, you're going to find that community.
Mm. I also wanted to talk about the consulting work that you do. In 2019, you established How the Right Strategies, which is dedicated to helping businesses, foundations, and nonprofits contribute to a greener, healthier, and equitable world. What are some of the common issues that you help others navigate?
Oh, that's fascinating. And I like, such a great question. And I think one of the important things that Gen Z and your peers already know, which was a big shift for me as a Gen Xer, is that in the future economy, you'll probably have multiple hats.
Mm.
I always thought of myself, especially as a lawyer, working for a law firm, working for the United States Senate, working in nonprofit organizations. I always thought of myself as like heading up an institution or being part of an institution, but realizing like I've got my One Green Thing institution, I've got my consulting, I've got my writing, and just this idea of having flexibility. I want to point out I'm very privileged. I have a husband who has a very steady job with great healthcare, so I can be much more
Mhm,
flexible.
mhm,
But I think that's important, is understanding that you may have multiple roles, and that leaning into that is exciting. It was a big challenge for me.
mhm,
But with consulting, I love. So with consulting, I help nonprofits and businesses do everything from fundraise, for coming up with what their branding and marketing strategies need to be. If they're working on an advocacy campaign, what's the best way to deal with advocacy and move the different levers of change? Should it be a policy campaign? Should it be a social media campaign? If it is social media, how do you translate that into policy? If you do that, how do you measure your impact? So those are the types of things that I do working with foundations and in individual companies, but also nonprofits as well. And that's just been a lot of fun because I'm able to use my experiences, whether it be on Capitol Hill or the experiences I had working with the different, leading the different nonprofits I've one I've created and two I worked for, is really helpful to do that. And it's fun. So I think this idea of like doing well by doing good is
mhm,
absolutely not only possible in the economy that's ahead of us, but is going to be a crucial part of the economy. So as scary as like, what do you want to be when you grow up question is, and I know, Heidi, people are asking you like, where are you going next year? What does the fall look like for you? It's it's going to be better than you can imagine on the individual level. On the collective level, I want to be really clear that I'm not like the um, Pollyanna, everything's going to be fine when it comes to climate, because it's not. It's really bad. The news is
mhm,
really, really bad, and it's urgent. And when the United Nations head says it's code red for humanity, those are words that really hit and land
mhm,
with you, and land hard. That said, we have all the solutions. What is missing is the political will. And if we bring as many people as possible into this movement and we start talking about what the world can look like if we meet the sustainable development goals, what would, you know, Washington, D.C. look like if we had rooftop gardens everywhere, if green design was the norm, if we had clean energy, EV infrastructure, what could it look like? And we could create something really beautiful. And that's one of the things I talk about in 60 Days to a Greener Life. I even have a visualization where, imagine 2030. What would it look like if we met the sustainable development goals?
mhm,
What does a healthier, clean, green energy future look like? What does it feel like? And I think an exercise like that can help us crystallize what we're working towards. Because right now, we like fighting against raging wildfires, climate migration, no water, like the apocalyptic vision
yeah,
is harder. It is harder than this idea of creating something that we can be proud of. And so when I
mhm,
talk about this ancestor idea, which I know in many cultures, it's a very common part of paying respect to your ancestors, talking about your ancestors, having that intentionality, whether or not you know your specific ancestors, just this idea of
mhm,
a generational
yeah, yeah,
equity and paying respects. I think it's important for us to embrace this long-term thinking, this idea of what are we creating for the next generation? What can we create that will make them proud of who we are and the opportunities we made for them individually, but also collectively? So I think that really starting to paint this image of what the future could look like is really important.
mhm, yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, I guess like part of that future, many listeners are, trying to figure out where they want to get started. I guess like for those that are, interested in or, want to start their own consulting agency or nonprofit even, I guess like what advice or resources do you recommend for them?
Oh, the advice is great. So I do think you want to ask yourself, what is it that you're going to offer? And you don't have to have a lot of experience to offer, especially I think this when it comes to social media, people are hiring Gen Zers left and right because the technology is changing, how we communicate is changing, and how Gen Z communicates is different than how baby boomers and Gen X communicate and millennials. And so it's important, that's a great opportunity for you. So think about what value you want to add. And then once you figure that out, kind of what is your plan? How much do you want to invest in yourself? If you can, if you can't, if it's a side hustle as you're getting started, what does that look like? And then I think the most important thing in business, and I said this with respect to also dealing with eco anxiety and being part of this, is relationships. Just having and building over time authentic long-term relationships with people, which, okay, Heather, how do you do that? Right? Like, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I need to develop relationships with people. It is taking the initiative and reaching out. And one of the things I teach a law school class at the University of Tennessee Law School, which that's where I graduated from law school. And it's a climate leadership class for lawyers. And many of the people that go through the class don't want to be environmental lawyers. They just want to be good citizens. So they're interested in learning about sustainability and climate action.
Mhm.
But one of the things I talk to them about, and this is really important for people your age,
Mhm.
is the concept of the informational interview. And you may know this, but I didn't really know this until I was in law school when I was looking for a job. And there's a great book I recommend called What Color is Your Parachute? And it is really frustrating and really an excellent book. And the reason it's
Mhm.
frustrating is that it makes you do a lot of work. You have to ask yourself, what do you want? Where are you most happy?
Mhm.
What do you envision your world of work to be like? How do you want to contribute? How much money do you want to make? What do you want your future to look like? How can you get there? So it's a lot of work, but it's great. But one of the key things is the informational interview. And what
Mhm.
you do, especially for listeners who are your age, well, it's not true of your age. It's true for anybody.
Mhm.
Find people who are doing things that you think you might want to do. Whether they're artists or playwrights or engineers or computer scientists or neuroscientists, and reach out. Hopefully it's not a cold call. It makes it a lot easier if it's, a friend of
Mhm.
a friend that you can talk to, and you ask them their advice. Just ask them how they got started. Would they do it again? What do they wish they had known? What advice do they have? Share with them what you think you might be interested in. Ask for their reaction. And then you thank them for their time.
Mhm.
And then you ask them if there's anyone else that you should talk to. And then if they give you somebody to talk to, then you talk to them. And then once you figure out what you're doing, whether it's graduate school or college or an internship, you then send them an email and say, thank you so much for taking time with me. I just wanted to give you a heads up, and I landed at X job, and I just want to thank you. And then maybe a couple months or even a year later, you can say, oh, hey, remember me? You spent 15 minutes sharing your story with me. I just wanted to say XYZ happened and thank you. And over time, that is how you build your network.
Mhm.
And it seems so like prescriptive and like a little formula, but it totally works, especially when those conversations, when you click with the person and it's based in an authenticity. And then,
Mhm.
as Heidi, as you know, as a podcast host, people like to talk about themselves, especially older people. They're happy to share their experience and their advice. And that's how you end up building that network. And I think along those lines, Heidi, one of the things that people said to me is, find a mentor. And I'm like, how does mentoring work? I always thought that someone would like tap me on the shoulder and say, Heather, you're amazing. Come with me. Let me show you, this whole world. And maybe that happens to some people, but for most people, it is finding someone that you're interested in their career
Mhm.
and keeping in touch with them, asking them for advice, being very respectful of their time, and you basically are choosing your mentor.
Mhm.
That's kind of how it usually works, that I found in my experience.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you for that. And I mean, also, like, you do a lot of like public speaking, and I personally have had to speak in the past, but I also have a lot of, you know, generalized anxiety. But I mean, just I guess like with regards to that, what advice or resources do you recommend for those who might be becoming public speakers or, are public speaking and whatnot?
Well, I think there's so many incredible opportunities for Gen Z to be at the table and to speak in ways that weren't necessarily open several years ago. And I
Mm.
think that's important. I think that's an important change in our culture, led by the leadership of young people like you, but also an awareness of that intergenerational partnership, what I call think beyond your age, isn't just a buzzword. It's very
Mhm.
important. It's important for us to think about future generations. It's important for us to have this intergenerational learning. So, but with the nuts and bolts of public speaking, if you're nervous about it, I just recommend practicing. You don't want to over practice. I don't want to get too political, but there was a certain Republican response, this with the State of the Union, that probably was a little too directed.
Mm.
So you don't want to be too you don't want to practice too much, but you really want to know what you're going to say. Some people have the gift of extemporaneous speaking. Excuse me. Some people have the gift of extemporaneous speaking. That's usually not me. I told you I was a wonk. I like being prepared. I like knowing what I need to do. So I think it's just knowing the key points you want to make, telling a story. We're just right off the bat, just getting people in to the conversation. And I think that's the most important thing, is just to know what your goal is, to have your key 3 points, to practice. And often what I do is I record myself before I'm doing like Good Morning
Mm.
America or something like that. I'll record myself, and just, or if I'm giving a big talk like Clinton Global Initiative, I'll just make sure I try not to have too many ums, but if you don't have ums, people aren't really sure if you're authentic. So kind of
Right,
let
right.
that go, right? Because you can sound too canned. So anyway, just listen to yourself a couple times. I think I always find that to be helpful as well. And then of course, it's practice and experience. As much as young people have these incredible opportunities for platforms now, and as much as I'm doing all I can to lift voices up, but also really I see my role more as helping baby boomers and Gen X create space to hear and to act with what young people are worried about in the future. I think experience really does help a lot. The
Mm.
more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, yeah, really appreciate that. And I mean, also like with regards to just writing, you've written now two books, One Green Thing and 60 Days. I guess like what were some of the challenges that you faced while writing them, and what advice do you have for those who want to write their own book one day?
Oh, such a good question. Lots of challenges. The first thing I had is that when I was pitching this book, it was 2020,
Mm.
and people didn't know what eco anxiety was. So in 2020, I was really talking about the importance of not only my book, One Green Thing, but it ended up my second book is all about action and a daily devotional and easy to understand, easy to apply ways to get involved. Is eco anxiety the frame? People were like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Even though when I was pitching this, the skies were orange in San
Mhm.
Francisco, right? Because of the wildfires in Canada. I mean, we
Right.
were seeing all of these disasters. Australia was on fire when I was pitching the book initially. And it just so some of the things with respect to publishing is knowing that publishing is just about 18 months to 24 months off what the current cultural trend is. So just kind of understanding that. So I was a little upfront on eco anxiety. So that was a challenge. So it took a while for me. So the book, eco anxiety, the book was initially titled Eco Anxiety, became One Green Thing, Discover Your Hidden Power to Help Save the Planet. So it transformed to nonfiction about eco anxiety to self-help, a
Mm.
self-help book on climate action, which is great because I think it was an important need.
Mhm.
And now this new book, 60 Days to a Greener Life, is this idea of just take it and run with it. Like just get started. Just do one thing, and every chapter is a day. So day one is, go outside and experience the awe. Day two is feel all the feels and understand eco anxiety. Day three is start with connection. So it breaks it down in these small punchy ways to get involved. So that is a long way of saying, Heidi, have faith in yourself and
Mm.
understand that the timing is what it is. It may not always work the way that you expect it works. And believe in yourself. With respect to a book proposal, what I thought was interesting is I thought you write the book and then pitch it. I think for fiction, that is a lot of what you do. But for nonfiction, you usually write a chapter or two and then have a detailed outline.
Mm.
So if you have an end in mind and know where you want the book to go, that is kind of how you end up pitching it. And often your editor becomes a
Mm.
collaborator with you on how the book works. But I would say the power of a blog, the power of the podcast that you're doing, getting your writing out there, whether it's writing op-eds, whether it's, just getting your message out there on TikTok or Instagram, whatever work threads, whatever works for you. And I know I sound really cool because I just said threads. I'm just saying, Heidi, this 51-year-old just said threads. Um, but the point is that getting your message out there will create opportunities too.
Mm.
And just the more you write, the better you get at it.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I guess like we're kind of winding down here, and I just really wanted to thank you so much again for just taking the time to speak with me about all this. This is really insightful. Every episode at the end, I like to go and ask a question about turning back time. So I guess like if you could turn back time, butterfly effects aside, and tell your younger self something that you've learned from life so far, what advice would you give to them?
Oh, so you need to know, Heidi, this is my Roman Empire. Okay. Have you heard like the Roman Empire, like
Yes.
ever the Roman Empire? Like, what is the thing that you think about all the time? I think about this all the time. I think about time travel. I think about talking about my future self. I think I talk about my younger self. I think the most important thing I would say is don't be so hard on yourself.
Mm,
There's just, and I think that really would connect to Gen Zers because the weight of the world, I know it feels like it's on your shoulders. It does for my kids. You're not alone.
mm,
You're not alone. Even if you feel alone and you're part of the loneliness epidemic, you are not alone. There are people who care about you, friends, family, even if you're in challenging family situations, you are loved. And, I've always known I was loved, but I think I did put a lot of pressure on myself to hit certain milestones and just let it all go. It's all going to be
mm.
okay. And again, I don't mean that in a Pollyanna sense, Heather, it's all going to be all okay, but we have 6 years to save the planet, right? What I mean is don't be so hard on yourself. Be kind, be self-compassionate. That internal critic, oh, I should have done this. Oh, why am I not doing this? Oh, I should have, prepped more, or, oh, I can't believe I said that. Da, da, da. That inner critic, that voice does not help you be more
Mm.
successful. That inner critic prevents you from being your best self. And that's something that I had to grow to learn about over time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like when we talk about like there's sometimes that it feels like there's a fine line between talking about optimism and talking about taking care of ourselves. But I think, yeah, definitely a key thing from this conversation is that we really need to it's not only a nice to have and okay to do it, but it's essential. Yeah.
And what's interesting in this conversation, I was, calling back the conversation about sleep and these environmental disasters where sleep was a factor, lack of sleep was a factor. Just this idea of like taking care of yourself is the right thing to do for you, but it's also the right thing to do for other people. And I
Mhm.
don't mean this in a capitalistic, get all of the, uh, chips on the table, like on in Las Vegas, you want to put the big pile over to yourself. I mean, rest. I mean, journaling. I
Mhm,
mean, exercise. Because when you are functioning and taking care of yourself and you're the best version of yourself, you can really help the people in the world around you. And if you are not taking time out for rest, it's harder to do what you need to do to create that better future that we deserve collectively and that is within reach. It's just going to take all of us.
mhm. Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for that. And I mean, I guess just like for listeners who want to keep up with the work that you do, and I highly recommend all the resources that we discussed that you've created. They're gonna be links in the description or whatnot. But yeah, I guess just like where can listeners find you?
Oh, thank you for that, Heidi, and thank you so much for creating this podcast and for connecting. It's been such a joy to get to know you, and I am inspired and in awe. But this climate crisis is not all on your shoulders. I do believe in the intergenerational partnership. OneGreenThing.org is the nonprofit, all one word. We have all kinds of great resources, including a bullet journal for you to journal your feelings. We have a thing called the Joy Tracker, where you can track your daily practice of sustainability and decide what brings you the most joy. Is it the walk in nature? Is it call to the member of Congress? Is it composting? Is it switching brands? Whatever it is it community? What brings you the most joy? We also have intergenerational discussion guides. So you can kind of have a plan to talk to the people in your life that are from different generations and hold space and let them know how you feel about climate. Also, I'm at Heather White Official on Instagram. And I'm, oh my gosh, much to my kids' absolute despair, dismay, embarrassment, cringe. I'm on TikTok at Heather White Official. I'm on TikTok.
I'm not even on
So,
TikTok
oh
yet,
yeah.
but
So that's a resource too. And then 60 Days to a Greener Life, Ease Ecoanxiety through Joyful Daily Action comes out April 9th. And that is available through HarperCollins, and it's on audiobook, ebook, it's in paperback, and anywhere you love to buy books. So Barnes and Noble, Amazon, your local independent bookstore, you can get it anywhere you love to buy books.
thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with me today. Really learned a lot. Yeah.
Oh, Heidi, thank you for the opportunity to connect, and thank you for everything you're doing. I can't wait to hear about what happens in the future for you. I promise it's going to be better than you ever dreamed of. Even if it's not exactly what you thought was going to happen, it'll be a wonderful experience. And I'm so glad that you're part of this movement and creating this platform for people to share and connect. It's really important. Thank you for your work.
I appreciate that. That means a lot.